So my name is Jules and I write and illustrate children's picture books. And I thought I'd start really with where it all began for me. And I think, you know, what with Lemony Snicket, to misquote Lemony Snicket, I think life can be a series of fortunate events. And that's certainly how I ended up becoming an author and illustrator. So my first slide, Anna, is epiphany, I think. There we are. So this goes back a really long way to, I always knew that I was going to end up doing something arty because I came from a very arty family, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I kind of bumbled through life and ended up by hook or by crook in graphic design, which actually has been incredibly helpful to my writing career, because it's meant that I had a sort of broad understanding of typography, photography, different artistic materials and ways of using them, and what things look like on a page. So when I was at university, I was doing a lot of posters and you know, sort of advertising type things. And one of the projects that I was was given the opportunity to take. Not everybody did it. Some people did a photography one, other people did a typography one, but I chose to do the Macmillan's Children's Book Prize topic. And every year they run a thing where they invite people to send in their dummy books and a few illustrations, and you know, there's a prize at the end. And this really was an amazing opportunity for me, because it meant I got to work with somebody. They had an outside tutor who came in, whose name was Simon James, and he is a children's picture book author and illustrator. And having gone through lots of different finding lots of different things to do, I did a bit of fashion design, and I did some fashion illustration, and I did photography and all these other things. And suddenly my mind was focused, and I saw what he did, and I just thought, that's what I want to do. I know now exactly that is the thing that I want to do for the rest of my life, for my job. And we sat, and he read me one of his books, and he was right at the about 5 years into his career. So he was a bit further on than I was, and he'd been quite successful already and had won some prizes. And I highly recommend you go and seek his work out if you haven't heard of him before, Simon James, because he writes some really beautiful books, picture books. And he taught me quite a lot. And the outcome really of it was that I wrote my first book, which is this one, Vincent. I think you've got a slide as well, haven't you? Vincent and the Vampires. But I didn't, when I say I wrote it, I had the idea for it, I got the layouts written down for it, and I got a little bit of some of the artwork done, and that really was it. And I didn't get, you know, must have been thousands of people who'd entered this prize, so I didn't get anywhere with it. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I'd learned such a huge amount about how to put a book together in the space of probably 8 weeks. So this book idea then kind of stayed in my mind, and I'd written another one whilst I was still there at college. And then when I left college and I started work, I wrote another one, and that idea got to that same stage, and I put it on my bookshelf, and I started getting a bookshelf full of all these ideas of books that I wanted to produce at some point. And I probably had about 4 or 5 different ideas to dummy book stage. which I'll show you what a dummy book looks like in a minute. But what happened then was that, having spent quite a long time in London and going around seeing various publishers, and Vincent almost got off the ground, but then at the last minute didn't quite, because there was problems with the American side of the business. It was quite a big publisher as well, so they had to rely on their other business partners agreeing to it, and it just wasn't quite right. So it didn't quite get there, which was very frustrating, even though they loved it. So I ended up instead instead of having book babies, having real babies. And I had 2 in 4 years, and that kind of kept me busy for a while. I did have this idea when I had my first son, that I could really just have a couple of weeks off, and that he'd be in his little rocky chair on the floor, and I could, rock him with my foot and continue with my work on the table in front of me. And that idea was soon shot down when I realized the enormity of having a newborn baby. So the real babies took over my life for quite a while, and it wasn't really until my younger son had properly started school that I began to get back into the ideas of, well, what can I do with these books? I really want to create a children's picture book. I really want to get my work out there, because I felt I was very passionate about it, and I felt they were worthwhile ideas, and I thought I had the skill to kind of put things together nicely and make them look like a proper book, not like, something kind of cobbled together. So that I was working on that, hoping, again, sending books out, but things had changed. I mean, we're talking about probably, I think maybe 15 years between when I was at university and I had the very first idea about Vincent, and at this point where I'm thinking I still want to get it out there. And things had really changed in the publishing world. So back when I first started, there was something called vanity publishing, which was it was kind of crossed over with self-publishing, because it was pre-digital days, so printing was quite a big deal. You couldn't have small runs of books, so you'd be printing maybe 10,000 copies. Then there was the problem of where were you going to keep them, and the fact that you're going to have this massive outlay to start with in terms of finance. So and the vanity publishing side of it was when you would get a company that would say, well, you can, we will publish something for you, but maybe like a short story in an anthology, but you need to pay us some money, and then you will get 10 copies. And that was how they funded their business. And it was all a little bit seedy and a bit, had a bit of an unpleasant taste to it. So I didn't really ever want to get into doing that side of things. But thankfully, by the time I'd come out of the other side of that 15 years, we were in the digital age, and we had computers, that everyone had a computer, and everything was much easier to access. So it was just a different world in terms of publishing. So I ended up, as you do, when you've got children, sometimes, you might be out in the woods doing something, or lifting them up strangely, and you hurt your back. So this is how I ended up with my chiropractor, who I saw quite regularly during this period of time. And, when you're face down, with just your pants on, and someone's trying to fix your back for you, you're in quite a vulnerable state. And I get on very well with my chiropractor, and he was, he'd say to me, how are things going? How are the books going? I'll say, I'm still writing, but yeah, nothing much beyond that. I wish I could get my books out there. And he just gave me a, very straightforward chat on one of these occasions, and just said, what is stopping you? what is stopping you? You can now order short runs of books. So you can order a couple of 100 copies, or now with the advent of the big old and fabulous, she says slightly sarcastically, Amazon, you can do print on demand. So you don't even need to buy lots of copies. You can just, put it out on Amazon and people will buy a copy and they print it and send it out to you. So I thought, yeah, I don't know, what is actually stopping me from doing this? So I pretty much basically came home, skipping home with my newly fixed back, and just started getting on with it, the work of getting the book to a position where I could send it off to be printed and out to the world. So Vincent actually started off on the print on demand service, which was then called Create Space and is now called KDP, or Kindle Direct Publishing. So I thought I would just take you through a little bit of how I got to that stage. So my first stage is to do some thumbnails, which are these. And I think, Anna, if you could go to the next, there we go. So this doesn't, no, that's, I think the slideshow is much better. So I draw little boxes. I mark out 32 pages because that's a normal amount for a picture book, of which 24 pages are the active storytelling, and then you've got some end pages and you've got your title page and copyright and all the rest of it. So I've got my 24 pages of story in very small boxes, and then that's really helpful. So it's very minute amounts of detail on that. It just gives me enough understanding to see that there's a rhythm to the story, that where maybe there's a gap or where there's too much information in one place, so maybe that needs to be spread out a bit more. And because there's such little boxes, they're easily changed and replicated. You don't feel quite so precious about starting again or taking a page out or changing things around, because if you've got them as little individual boxes, then you can of course move things. And then once I'd cemented what I had a really good idea about where the flow was in the story, then the second picture you've got there on that slide is having them real size, but hanging them all the way around my studio walls so that I can see them in greater detail. And at that point, when I'm doing my layouts, my real size layouts, that's when I start putting a lot more detail in. Not the text. This is all to do with the pictures, and also where I need to sort of think about where the text is going to go, but not actually put the text in. The post-it notes that you can see, those little bright coloured squares that you can see, they have got some text on. And sometimes it's just an idea of what might be said, or sometimes there's an idea of what might be the drawing that might be on the page. But basically, the reason I like to put them around my studio is so that I can stand back, a bit like being at a gallery. I can stand back and look at them right from the very first page and see them all at once and make sure that everything fits properly. There's no continuity errors or places where I need to speed up a bit or slow down a bit, but hopefully I've already ironed those things out in the previous step. So that's a really, that stage actually takes a little bit longer than other stages. And at that stage, when I'm thinking about the writing, I already know roughly what I'm going to say, but it's still a bit fluid as to how I'm going to say it. Sometimes, I mean, I have had occasions where I've written the story before I've done anything else. So for example, with Bluebell, this one, Bluebell's New School, I had written all of the text for that before I thought about the character or the illustrations or what sort of book it was going to be. So that was a bit of a different way. So I do tend to sort of work slightly differently each time I do a new book, but generally speaking, this is how I start to approach things. And then once that's done, the other thing as well is that I can work out how big my pages need to be. And if I'm not doing a 32-page book, how many pages I'm going to need overall. And there's one of my layouts, and I will show you actually, I found earlier, am I done with it, the actual finished painting. Let's see if I can get the light to work properly. There it is. And the way that I've worked with a lot of these watercolor pictures is I do them, it's a bit like when if you're working on Photoshop, which I use the Adobe software, so I use Photoshop, Illustrator and InDesign. If you're used to working on a computer at all, then you're probably used to working in layers, which means that it's much easier if you've got different layers for different colors or different bits of drawing or different text, because then if you want to change things, you just remove that layer or edit the layer. Excuse me. But what I ended up doing with these illustrations was actually working in layers in terms of picking out different elements and then scanning them in. Or actually with Vincent, I don't know how well you can see this, but with Vincent, I literally cut out with a scalpel every single little element in the book. And let me tell you something. I thought I'd never want to see a scalpel again in my life after doing that. And I had a dent in my finger, in this finger. I had such, in fact, it's pretty much still there. Had a dent where I was holding it so tightly over a period of about 4 to 5 weeks, and cutting out every tiny little bit of vampire or you know, the other little bats that are in it, or the trees. There's quite a lot of trees and things, but every single piece was layered one on top of the other. And I didn't physically lay them on top of one another. I scanned them in individually and then used the magic eraser to get rid of all the background, and then I can move them around on screen. And that's actually quite helpful because you can change the colors of things, you can change the size of things, you can mute things back a little bit, or bring the saturation up a bit. So I found that to be the most useful way for me to be able to manipulate things on the page for all of my books that I've done so far. So, and then I'd have things like this, which is just, I'm not sure if I actually use this actually, but this is just magenta, sort of pinky purpley ink that I've put from one side of the page to the other with a big brush, broad brush. And then that was going to act as a background for something. I'm not sure if I ever used it or not. And then here are lots more little, this one's actually from Flossie Bonts, which is a story about a fairy who helps Father Christmas when he's poorly on Christmas Eve, as was the one of the little girl in the bed, that one. So all of these little individual things, there she is, and there's Flossie sprinkling some fairy dust at the end of the bed into the stocking. So all of these things, individual things, were all, you know, all individual elements that were put together. So that's kind of my process for working. When I've got that far, I then, as I say, I put it all into my Adobe software. I usually use Photoshop quite a lot, and then put it into InDesign, which is because the difference, I don't know if you haven't used that sort of software before, Photoshop, you can only have one page at a time. So you can't have, like if you've used Word before, you can have lots of pages one after the other. But with Photoshop, you just get one page. But with InDesign, that's you can have as many pages as you want. So you can then take because they all talk to each other in Adobe, you can take your JPEG or your PDF out of Photoshop and put it in InDesign, and then you can run your pages one after another. And that is how they get sent off to either to KDP or up to my printers. And then if I'm printing stuff, because I have a foot in both camps, I do KDP because it can then go straight onto Amazon, and that's how a lot of people like to get their books, and that's fine. I buy books on Amazon, but there are a lot of people, and I find this to be much more, in a marketing sense, much more lucrative for me, is to actually get some printed copies for myself. Not only do they look nicer, but you've also got then the individual personalization between you and your reader, because you can sign the book and you can talk to your customer, and I think it's much more sort of friendly and personable. So when I've sent off all of my things to the printer, all of my digital files, I then get a proof back, and a proof looks like this. So this is what turns up. This is The House on Hare Hill, which was my 5th book, I think. I counted them today. I've actually got 12. I thought I had 11, but I've actually got 12. So one of them has sneaked in somewhere along the lines. So anyway, this is what they send you. They send you, it's not stuck together. So you get a cover like this, which is usually printed on card that's a bit more sturdy. Then you get, where is it, this way? There's all the proofs, and that's come out quite well, isn't it? This texture. This is all salt. That's rather beautiful. I like it when the beauty comes from other things. It's not my skill. It's chucking stuff at a bit of paper and suddenly makes a beautiful, mark on the page. So this comes with the cut-off lines. I don't know if you can see, there's a little black line that runs all around. So that would be the edge of the page. So you wouldn't get, when they've cut them properly, then you don't get all this white. But what you do get is you get to see what it looks like in real life. There we go, because they print on the back as well as, both sides, but it's just not stuck together. So you get one of those, which is very useful. And if ever you're in this situation and you're, you want to have some copies printed, even if it's through Amazon, I would highly recommend that you get a proof, because you can see your colours, and it looks, no matter how long you stare at your screen for, there's something about having the book in your hands that makes you look at it differently. So you'll pick up on things that perhaps you didn't realise were there. Maybe you might, hopefully you've had it proofread. I always have my books proofread now, because I have fallen into the trap of not and making a mistake. Which was thankfully not massively costly, because I only had 20 copies, which, I guess it's a bit like the old penny black stamp. If you find one, maybe it's going to be worth a lot of money, who knows? But yeah, get yourself a proof, because I found that sometimes the colours aren't quite right. I also had a problem with one of my books where my proofs were perfect, but when I had my consignment of books arrive, they were all slightly imperfect. And because they had some funny little speckles in the, I think there was a problem with the printing ink. And because I had my my proofs, I could go back to the company, and they were initially a bit sniffy about it, saying, oh no, it's not us. But I could say to them, look, this is what my proof looks like. You know, here's a photograph. It doesn't look like that now. So I did actually win that, and they gave me over half of my money back, which was great. I mean, it wasn't so hideous that you know, I think I was probably being a little bit overly precious about it, because I don't think other people would necessarily notice the little speckly bits, but I noticed, and it wasn't quite right for me. So I was glad to have sort of won that battle with them. But generally speaking, my printers have been really, really good. So I think we were going to talk about decisions, weren't we? Retrospective decisions. Have you got that? There we go. Key decisions. So when I first started writing, I just wanted to get my story out. You know, I just wanted to write my story and be done with anything else. Nothing else mattered. You know, I just needed to get the words down and some of my pictures down. But if you don't start by making these key decisions about things, I think you're making a bit of a rod for your back, because when you start to go down the route of selling your book, whether that's on Amazon or in a bookshop or anywhere else really, people are going to want to know who this book is for. So that's what you really need to think about, and that's something that I struggled with to start with, because I thought, well, I don't know how old these children are going to be. They're going to be as old as, you know, some children at 3 are fantastic readers. Some children at 9 are not fantastic readers, you know. So how do you know? It's a bit like, you know, how long is a piece of string? But actually there is a really good there's a sort of information out there that will help guide you through that. And I found it really helpful to know that, for example, the 3 to 6 year olds, which is my main group, my main audience, they don't have a massive attention span, especially the younger ones, you know, not going to have a huge attention span. So they're not going to want to sit down and listen to something like Wind in the Willows. I tried it with my children when they were little, and actually I found that really hard going. As much as I loved it as a child, it's too old. There are too many words. So a 3 to 6 year old, you know, I found really you're looking at something between 500 and 1,000 words, which is quite a surprise to a lot of people, because that doesn't seem like an awful lot. And it's not. They need a short book. So I knew that I was writing the right length in terms of pages, but how many words I needed to write, and the words that I was choosing. Not only do you need to make every word work for its place in your book, because you have so few, but also you need to choose words that they are going to understand for the most part. There's nothing wrong with throwing in an odd, you know, word that perhaps they can ask, what does that mean? There's no harm in throwing in some completely made up words. I mean, let's face it, Julia Donaldson hasn't done so badly out of the Gruffalo. And did we know what a Gruffalo was before she came along? No, we didn't. So you can chuck in your own made up words, that's okay. But the main basis of the story needs to be something that they can understand. And also when it comes to drawing your pictures, if you're somebody who wants to make your own pictures as well as do your own text and narrative, you need to think about your layout of your page and how big your page is going to be, because before you start putting start doing any artwork, you need to know the constraints of your page. And that's something that I found certainly doing my graphics degree helped with that, because I think I would have really struggled had I have not known that bit of information. And also of course the format, as in, well, this book is, Vincent is square, so that's I think it's 8.5 inches, but that was dictated by what I wanted to produce on Amazon. because they give you certain sizes to work with. But do you, if you're using a rectangular book, is it going to be landscape or portrait? So all those sorts of things you need to think about first. And also in terms of, I mean, something that I struggled with, you can see down the bottom there, keywords, description, title, subtitle. This is really important to be able to be seen when you're trying to sell, particularly online, that your title matches into your keywords and your description. Those three are really important. So for example, let's take the example of Vincent and the Vampires, then I would have in my keywords the title again, but another keyword would be vampires or Halloween, that sort of, you know, to sort of try and give you this the right sort of feel for this book. And when they talk about keywords, it can be key descriptions, key sentences, not just one word on its own. In fact, several words together are much better. And then in the description, you then have to use those words again to kind of glue all that information together. And I discovered that if you have a subtitle, so that could be just like a little strap line of something like Vincent and the Vampires, a spooky nighttime story, then that's really useful. You need to have that on your front cover. It can be tiny, but it needs to be there somewhere. But also what then happens is if somebody's searching, I would like to find a spooky nighttime story for 10-year-olds, say, for example, then it might pop up. So a lot of these key decisions are things that you need to think about before you start, and that comes from my own personal experience of getting there, sort of stumbling along through the jungle of trying to get a book published in the first place. And believe me, it was ever so slightly stressful, but hopefully a bit less stressful now these days than it was back then. In terms of marketing, I thought it might be helpful to tell you about the things that really didn't work. So basically, when I first started, I had Vincent out, and then very shortly followed by one of my bestsellers, which is Royal Fleas. And I think the main reason why it's a bestseller is because the title, I mean, you know, not only are you selling to small children, but you are selling to the people who have the money to buy this, so the grandparents and the parents, and they all seem to really like the titles, so that sells quite well. So I had those two books out, and my approach was the scattergun approach. Anything that I could do, I did. Anywhere I could take my books, I would take them. So I set up an Etsy page with my books on. I did school fairs. I did craft fairs. I did markets in the summer, because we live on an island and we have lots of visitors in the summer. So there are lots of visitor attractions. And so I did lots of those things. And I thought, school fairs are going to be fantastic. And this is like Christmas fairs and stuff like that. I thought, I've got, you know, these are the people who buy my books. I'm talking to my audience. I'm there. There's nobody else like me selling, you know, children's books. There are other people doing, you know, various other things like, you know, games and selling little Christmassy things or whatever. Or in the summer, they'd be doing running races or whatever. But there's nobody else selling books. So I've got a captive audience. It should be fantastic. How wrong could I be? People weren't there to buy books. They were there to spend 50p, which is, if you're, you know, from another country who doesn't have p, it's a very small amount of money. You know, they were there to spend a small amount of money buying some sweets and having a bit of fun and a bit of a laugh and go on some, you know, fun things to do, whack-a-mole, that kind of thing, not buy books. And after a summer of doing lots of different school fairs, it was very demoralizing. So I gave up on that. My Etsy page, I did sell a few books here and there. I sold more. I did a lot of family and pet portraits in the early years, and those sold really well. But the books, not so much. I think, again, because people just weren't expecting to come across books there. And then in terms of craft fairs and the other things that I did in the summer, that worked a lot better. But still, it was really exhausting, and it was very weather dependent. So if we had a really bad run of weather and a lot, this is England we're talking about here. We had a lot of rain or a lot of wind in the summer, then I couldn't work. I couldn't I'd have my marquee up, but I couldn't open up or have my books outside because they would get wet. And then people just didn't turn up anyway. So that didn't really work. But I did discover some things that did work that might help you. One of the best things to do if you've got a book out is to do school visits. And to be honest, I did, when I very first thought about having Vincent and the Vampires published, somebody said to me, oh, you should go around and read to children in schools. And I thought, do you know what? I think I'd rather hammer nails into my feet. I couldn't think of anything more terrifying. And this is before I had my own children. I could not think of anything more horrifying than being sat in front of a class full of 34-year-olds and knowing what to say to them or what to do with them. But actually, having had my own children, that was the biggest learning opportunity in terms of having picture books and being an author, because I then learned how to read to my children and my children's friends, and then go into schools, because I was already in schools anyway with my children, taking them in and out every day and helping out with things. And suddenly it became just absolutely natural. And that is one of the best things to do, because you have got, if you've done an author visit to a school, and to start with, I did them for free, go into school, read to the children, do a little craft activity with them, or get them to ask some questions, or talk to them about what it's like being an author. And then they will come back and say, oh, can I buy one of your books? And that was how I managed to fund those early days. Now I get paid to go into schools, and I also still manage to sell books. So that's an even better, outcome for me, sort of financially, because it's not, if you think you're going to be a millionaire coming into being an author, then that's not the best motivation for doing it, because you might not. You might be a J.K. Rowling, but you might be like millions of other authors and, just about scrape by. One thing that I love doing very much is library visits. And again, if you can't face going into doing schools and talking to lots of children all in one go to your libraries, because not only are they a great source of going and looking to see what children like reading and what books are currently there, and you can borrow them and take them home, but to go and do a library visit means that you might have 5 or 10 children that come and listen to your story, and it's not quite so scary. Doing other book events like literary festivals or story festivals, that is fantastic, because if you're thinking about the psychology of it, where do people expect to find children's books? That's what you're aiming at. And that's what I found I needed to aim at. Go where they're expecting to see an author with books that you can to sell. I had somebody on my very first outing who said to me, that's very expensive. I think my book was, I think it's £6, which is not expensive for a new book. She said, oh crikey, that's a very expensive book, isn't it? I said, is it? Thinking, oh gosh, I've done I've miscalculated somewhere, having done all my marketing research. And she said, yes. She said, I get all my books from the charity shop, so thrifted. I thought, well, of course it's expensive if you're going to be, if you buy secondhand books, then a new book feels like it's expensive. So what you need to do is find the places where people are expecting to buy new books. So have a YouTube channel, which is great for connecting with people. And these people are not, my YouTube channel is not aimed at children at all. It's aimed at helping adults like you to produce their own picture books. And also I also feed through to Instagram quite a bit, slightly different content, but still sort of picture book based. And also I've got a course that's that I run about how to make your own picture book. So that also helps. All of these things in terms of marketing are the things that I find are most helpful. So that scattergun approach was just too exhausting. I found I needed to, at the end of the, I think probably the end of the second year of doing this, like I'll do anything kind of approach, I realized actually it's not financially viable. I'm too exhausted. I haven't got enough time. It means I'm not spending the time writing, you know. So all of these things made me realize I needed to cut out the dead wood and just do the things that were meant I could really connect with people who might buy a book, but certainly were interested. And that's what you want. You want people to be interested in your work, I think. What was the next slide, Anna? I can't remember now. Oh, courses I took. So these are courses, I'm not necessarily recommending them because there are lots of marketing courses out there, but these are the ones that I did. Nick Stevenson is an author. He writes sort of suspenseful stories, but he's really hot on marketing. So I bought one of his courses, and that was really helpful in terms of understanding how to market digitally and get things out there via Amazon, get a book, because you can't put your book out on Amazon for free. Why would you want to put a book out on Amazon for free? Because you want people to read your books and then come back and buy your second book. But you can't do that unless you've got your books elsewhere for free. So he taught me how to do that. That was really useful. And then Sunny Lenarduzzi, she was very helpful on things like social media and sort of a slightly different, because she's not come from any kind of author background. She's much more of a broad stroke marketing genius. So I took one of her courses as well and found that really helpful. So there are hundreds of courses out there, and I think the right one will pop up for you at the right time if that's what you're looking for. But certainly there are two that you could check out. And then what was, oh, there's all of my books minus one. I was trying to figure out which is the one I haven't got up there. The one in the top left corner, Bloomin' Marvelous, that was actually my last self-published or indie pub. I always think of it as indie publishing. My last indie published book, which was a look through every single day in 2019. I went out and I drew what was around me, and I took note of the temperature, what the weather was doing, what the UV level was, what animals I saw, because I always feel like I get to a point in the year and I think, oh, I wonder what I was doing this time last year. Well, with that book, you can look back and see what was happening on that day in that year, which I find quite helpful, and I thought would be a useful look at climate change as well. And then Bye Bye Germs has been my first foray into traditional publishing, with a very lovely publishing group called Medina Publishing. They are great people over there, and this was something that we did right back. Excuse me, I'm just gonna have a quick drink. Right back at the beginning of the very first lockdown, and I'd actually caught COVID from the last thing I did was a World Book Day event, and I caught COVID from the school. And I was just recovering from it when I got a phone call saying, would you be interested in doing the illustrations for a book about hand washing? And it sort of snowballed from that. I wrote the narrative for it. There are two really fabulous scientists, Dr. Katie Laird and Professor Sarah Uni, who from De Montfort University, who did all the science bits. So made sure that the narrative story that I was writing about these two children who caught something, you know, and how they could make sure they were clean, kept all that on track. And that was a really interesting project to do. And we're actually currently working on a second version of that, which is all a bit kept under wraps at the moment, so I can't say too much about it, but it's equally very exciting. There's a lot of science going into it, and we've had a lot of very interesting discussions about how to go forward on that. So yeah, and there are all of my other books. Nature Calls down there on the bottom, that was my only other non-fiction book, and that one is because you've got, when I was saying before, you've got 24 pages, that works out as 12 double page spreads, which is lucky because apparently we have 12 months in a year. And I thought, well, it'd be rude not to have 1 month per page. And to have a look through the year, starting right from the beginning of the year and seeing what sort of things you can expect to see in your garden or at the beach or in a woodland or in a field. And also I worked with that one, that was quite different because I worked on my color palette first. So I was thinking about how the colder colors at the beginning of the year, and then sort of as you go through spring, warming up a bit, and then those beautiful, lots of, you know, very vibrant colors through the summer months. And then you've got, like this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, we've got all the oranges and russets and, you know, that sort of thing. And then coming back to the colder climes again. So that was a really nice project to work on as well. I think, was that my last slide? Oh no, there's a couple more slides, isn't there? That's my course, Make a Picture Book Step by Step. And it takes you through every step that you need to know to help you on your way to make your very own picture book. And if you see the address up there, julesmarinerbooks.com/courses. And at the moment, I've got a coupon code for you. There's the code, picturebook50. If you put that in at the checkout stage, then you will get 50% off. And that's up to the 31st of October this year, 2021. So if you put that code in when you have to enroll, I think you have to enroll on the course, and then when you get to the point where you pay, it'll ask you, have you got a code? Put picturebook50 in, and that will give you 50% off. And the normal price is $375 US. So that gives you quite a big whack of money off. And it should help you. But I do also have a 14-day money-back guarantee, because I do not want anyone to spend money and then be disappointed. So long as you follow my T's and C's, that you have, you know, you look at all of the lessons, that you'd have a little bit of a go at various things. If you think this really isn't for me, then I will give you your money back, because I don't want to be, you know, I don't want anyone to think there's any unfair shenanigans going on here. Anna, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like that was such a great overview. And I normally always start the questions with how did you get into writing? But I feel like you've already covered that. So I guess I want to ask, if you had like one piece of advice you could give someone before they start writing, or they say, oh, I've always wanted to write, but I just never have, or what advice would you give someone who's completely new to it?
Okay, so I would say, surprisingly, it's not the words that you've got to think about. It's not the structures of your sentences. It's not what the book title is. You know, that can come later. What you need to think about is who is going to be reading this, and that goes for any genre and any age range, whatever you're writing, but particularly I think for children, because there are these jumps in understanding and cognition in terms of what they like to read, what they understand in terms of books and stories, and you know, different age ranges. But there are, I mean, for example, if I just tell you a little bit about, I've got it written down here somewhere. I go into this in my course actually, but for example, early readers, which you're looking at the 6 to 9s, they would be looking at between 1,000 and 2,500 words. So you're thinking about, and that could be black and white pictures or colored pictures. So it's that sort of thing, that sort of information that you need to know and think about before you start writing. So you might have an idea about something and you think, actually, I can see this is going to be quite an epic story. I think I'm probably going to be writing chapters. So that then gives you an idea about how old your audience is going to be, and therefore what sort of language they're going to need. And that's when you can then go into thinking, right, how descriptive do I need to be? How long do the sentences need to be? What sort of wording do I need to use? Can I use words that are quite complicated, or does it have to be quite simple? So definitely who your audience is really important.
Such good advice. And I imagine that's even more important when you then go on to self-publish, and right from the start you've known, right, I'm writing for 6-year-olds, and so your marketing is really on it, and you know sort of exactly what you're aiming at.
You have to have that sort of elevator pitch. You know, if you got into a lift with Richard Branson and he said, what do you do? You've got 30 seconds. You know, you need to have it cemented in your mind. What do you do? You know, you don't, not just, oh, I write books for children. Oh, right. Who are these children? You know, what kind of books do you write? Do you write mystery? Do you write funny books? Do you write non-fiction books? Do you write books about science? Do you know, and who and how old? Because if you went in and you said to Richard Branson, oh, I write funny books for 3 to 6-year-olds, he might have a 3 to 6-year-old at home, grandchild, and think, oh yeah, okay, let me take your card. You know, so it's that sort of interaction with people that you really need. You need to be able to just trip it off the tongue, that exactly what it is that you do and who your reader is. And also, don't forget, with children's books, it's not, particularly the younger children, it's not just the young child that's reading it, it's the grandparent or the parent. So it has to kind of appeal to 2 different audiences almost.
You're kind of doing like a double sale, aren't you? You've got to intrigue the child, but also make the parent or grandparent or whoever willing to part with their money.
I think that's why Winnie the Pooh books work so well, because children loved it, but also there was a slight sort of undercurrent that appealed more to adults as well. A slight daftness, a bit of philosophy, you know, and some things that you pick up on as an adult that you wouldn't necessarily as a child. So that, I think that's why those books work so well. Conversely, the Mr. Men books, which my younger son loved, the Mr. Men books, and I started off with, I think Mr. Tickle was, which was his the first book that came out, the first of the Mr. Men books to come out, came out when I was a child, and I remember my dad reading it to me. But there was only one. There was that, and I think then Mr. Bump came out, and that was it. I was out of the Mr. Men. But by the time my youngest son was born, there were bloody hundreds of them, and he wanted one every night, and I was so sick to death of them by then. So that was, you know, that was one of those things where that appealed to the children, didn't really appeal to the adults, in my opinion.
But funny, because they do sell so well, and like once the kids read one, they want, like you say, they want loads. And I guess in that situation, keeping a quiet child quiet for 5 minutes is worth the pain. I've got a few questions from people watching. So Vicky was asking, what would your advice be for authors who aren't illustrators, and kind of particularly in terms of like keeping the costs down?
Yeah, that's quite a good question, Vicky, because it's certainly, I think I have made a video on this actually, that of different ways of approaching it. I mean, you can go to, there is that website called Fiverr, But don't be misled into thinking that each of your illustrations is only going to cost $5, because it absolutely won't. Illustrators, you know, are also trying to make a living, and it takes a heck of a long time to do illustrations. So you do really need to pay your illustrators a fair amount. But you can go to art schools and see if anybody would be interested in you know, doing the illustrations for, you know, a small amount, but also then they'd have a published book under their name if they're interested in that sort of things. I would have done that when I was at uni. You can also see if you know anyone who would be willing to collaborate on a book, and again then split the costs if and when you become multimillionaires. It's tricky, you know. I knew somebody who did photography for his books and then slightly manipulated the photographs, so it doesn't always have to be painted or drawn. You know, you could use collage, or there's just so many different ways of illustrating your book that's quite unique. That doesn't mean you have to be an artist. But it's tricky. If you are going to use an illustrator, you know, I would say you need to be fair with them in terms of how much, you know, you need to tell them exactly what you're expecting from them. I mean, it depends. If you want to have something in black and white, that's often cheaper. If you want to just have some little vignettes, so that's a small drawing rather than covering the whole page, that would be a lot less expensive. So there are ways around this, and it's worth exploring, you know, trawling places like Instagram or Pinterest or Fiverr, and going and speaking to one of the artists there.
And kind of linking to that, Liz asked, like, how much would an illustrator charge?
Well, they vary, you know. It's one might charge a very small amount, and then somebody who's been doing it for years and years and years and has more than enough work to keep them going might charge a fortune. It really is, you know, luck of the draw pretty much. I think when you're thinking about how long it takes, so for example, the Bye Bye Germs book that I did, the illustrations took me probably 35 hours, something like that, maybe 40 hours in total. So that's quite a long time, you know. It was spread over quite a few weeks. Doing something like one of my own books, it would usually takes me about 9 months from start to finish. So it does take quite a long time, and you know, you'd have to, you need to, if you want to have a really nice piece of work, then you have to be willing to budget for it, I think. So I'm sorry, I can't be very specific in terms of how much things are going to cost you. And I know I know that I wanted to know that, but the best way that you can find out is to go and ask somebody.
And I guess go and find illustrators that do the kind of stuff you like, and just go and ask them and kind of, yeah, figure out.
And also, if you do find somebody that you like, don't say, right, here you go and do me 32 pictures. Get them to do some initial sketches, some ideas, and then get them perhaps to do one picture to make sure that you like what they do, because you might have liked some other stuff that they did, but when they come to do what you want, it might not be quite right. So just, you know, take it slowly.
Yeah. And yeah, like you say, before you part with a lot of money, check that you really like what they're doing for you. Definitely. One final question that's slightly more practical. What printers would you recommend?
Well, as in, oh, okay. Well, I've used Short Run Press. They're in Exeter in the UK. I've used them quite a few times. They're pretty good. When you have your things printed by KDP, it doesn't come on quite as nice paper. And also it quite often has on the back page, it says printed by Amazon or something like that. So it's not quite as beautiful, but it does the job, you know. And if you're doing print on demand, then, you know, that's one way of doing it. You don't really have anything to do with it other than uploading your stuff digitally. What other ones are there? There's lots of different ones. I've used Book Printing UK, maybe not quite as successfully as Short Run Press, but there's lots out there. I mean, the best thing to do really is to, in your own country, because obviously it'll be less of a shipping cost, Google ones near you and ask them to send you samples of paper, because that's the best way. And then feel what it get a one of your own books that's already printed that you like, feel the paper, and then feel the sample that they've sent you, and see if they are comparable, because you don't want really sort of shiny paper that's like the old-fashioned toilet paper. That's pretty nasty. And I have seen some of those knocking around. So you want really nice quality paper, because what you want is a book that looks like it belongs in a Waterstones bookshop, or that a nice bookshop, rather than a book that's, if you get ones that are not printed beautifully, sometimes they curl a little bit in the slightest bit of humid atmosphere. So you don't want that, because that is a dead cert giveaway that it's indie published not particularly well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. I feel like everything you said has been super helpful, so thank you so much for a great session.
You're welcome. Yeah, and if anybody's got any questions and they want to get in contact with me, then you can do so via my website, julesmarrinerbooks.com, or seek me out on Instagram, and I will try and answer any questions that you've had.